Welcome. In this video, we're going to look at Chapter 6, Early Baroque Opera. So the Baroque period is a period after the Middle Ages, and it's a period from 1600s to 1750. Now, the name Baroque is a derivation of the term Barroco, which is from Portuguese, and it means an irregular shaped pearl. So when we think about pearls, we think of like a pearl necklace where there's a string of pearls that are very smooth, very round. Well, these irregular shaped pearls were kind of lopsided. They wouldn't fit into like the norm of like a smooth pearl necklace or what we think of as a pearl. And the term initially was a negative term to describe the extravagance in the arts. During this period, there was a lot of extravagance or an overabundance of wealth getting dumped into the arts. There'd be a lot of extravagant detail in a lot of the art as well. Like paintings would have elaborate detail in a lot of the art. We do see the 30 Years' War in this era, okay? We have a fascination with the theater, and this fascination is going to give rise to opera in the era. And then we'll also look at the doctrine of affections. And that's basically the doctrine of affections is a paper. And in this paper, they talk about how to invoke emotion through music. We also will see in this era, we see the age of science. We have Isaac Newton. And who was Newton? Well, Newton, he wrote about the laws of gravity. There's the analogy where he had the apple falling on his head, and he starts to theorize what gravity is. He also invents calculus, and then we also find absolutism. Okay, and basically there is monarchs with absolute power, like Louis XIV. We see this picture here with his palace of Versailles. And during this time, this era, you'd see these monarchs have a lot of wealth, and they would spend their money with lavish parties. They spend on lavish artwork, and it was this. Everything was all in abundance with this era. So, continuing talking about Baroque architecture, if we look at some of the art, it's in this like grandiose kind of flamboyant style. We can pay attention to the detail of the art. Okay, and that was very, very important during the time. On the right hand side, we see a lot of more architecture, and they were interested in colossal proportions. These very, very large, kind of grandiose pieces of art. And you'd have a lot of abundance in decoration, and things would be in excess. And that was kind of the culture, the aesthetic of the period. Continuing looking at Baroque painting, we have an emphasis on this flamboyant style. We see a lot of energetic motion and change. We'll also see a lot of dramatic contrast. And in artwork, we're going to see this within dark to light. And if we look at this picture, you'll see, you see two ladies and they're stabbing this gentleman in the neck. It is a dark kind of, it's a biblical scene. But you'll see the lighting to it, though. And the lighting for artwork, where the lighting is kind of shadowing on the gentleman and the ladies are in the dark, okay? And that's important when we talk about art. When we talk about music, we're going to see these dramatic contrasts and what we call terrace dynamics, where the music's going to be very, very loud, and then all abruptly, as sudden, it's going to be very, very soft. Now, the doctrine of affections. Now, the Doctrine of Affections was an actual document that talks about how music moods should be interpreted when we play music and when we write for music. So different musical moods could and should be used to influence the emotions of the listener. In fact, one of the doctrines says, the listener's emotions aren't going to be changed until the music changes and then influences the listener. So, characteristics of Baroque music. One of the main characteristics we'll look at is having an expressive melody. The emphasis is going to be on the melody in Baroque music, especially with early Baroque music. We're going to have a strong supporting bass line. One of the main differences between the Renaissance period and the Baroque period is going to be the difference in kind of how the texture gets laid out. So in the Renaissance period, a lot of the music is dominated by this polyphonic texture, where we're going to have these layers of melody kind of overlapping. In the Baroque period, we're going to start to see music that has a melody on the top and a bass line on the bottom, and then it's filled in by harmonies in the middle part of it. Now, let's listen to the Renaissance piece, which is going to be a polyphonic texture. Now, let's go listen to the early Baroque example I have, and this is going to be, it's going to be a song with you're going to have a melody to it, and then you're going to have a bass line. So it's not going to be polyphonic; it's going to be more homophonic. Next, we'll look at a monody. Now, a monody is a solo song, and this was a new kind of solo singing that was associated with the Baroque period. Lots of times, these monodies will be accompanied by a bass line and a few accompanying instruments. An example would be a solo singer and a bass, and then maybe a harpsichord playing or a lute playing. The text would be very, very highly charged, and it'd be often very, very virtuosic. Maybe there's a lot of melismas. The example we have here is going to be the prologue from Monteverdie's Orfeo. Let's listen. The basso continuo. Now, the basso continuo is what we call figured bass, and it's a kind of new innovation that comes out of the Baroque period. And it requires two instrumentalists, and what would happen is you'd have the cello or the bass playing a bass line while the harpsichord plays the chord progression above this bass line. And it became a kind of a shorthand for composers to be able to write music quickly, where they'd be able to write out the melody. They could put a bass line in it, and then they would have Roman numerals or nomenclature to indicate what chords they wanted over the bass line. And we could even see this here, the figured bass alone. You'll see different notes, and then each of these numerals or numbers will tell the composer what kind of chords are to be played over top of the bass line. So musicians, what they would do is they would go back and they would create, or they would chords over top of the figured bass. And this, the act of creating these chords over top of a figured bass is called realizing the bass. Okay, we see this in a lot of Baroque music, and we also see this in a lot of jazz music as well. Where your jazz music, you'll have a melody written out, and then you have chords over top of it. And again, it's a great way to have like a shorthand to be able to write music. Now, I'm going to play for you further. The first example is the figured bass line alone without any of the chords. Let's listen to that. Now that was the bass line. The next example is going to be the bass line, and it's going to have the chords above it as well. Let's listen. Continuing talking about opera. So we're going to look at the first opera of the Baroque era. It technically wasn't the first one, but it was the kind of the first important opera, and it was written by a guy named Claudio Monteverdi. And he was known primarily as the creator of opera. He composed the first important opera, and the opera was called Orfeo. And it was written in 1607. It was composed in Italy, and it was composed in a town called Mantua, Italy. And so Monteverdi lived there, and he worked for the court of Mantua, and he wrote this opera for the actual Duke of Mantua. Okay. Now we normally have an overture for the beginning of operas. That's that instrumental piece that kind of helps set up the opera, gets us ready to get engaged in the opera. And Monteverdi, he didn't call it an overture at this time. He called it a toccata, which means a touch thing. And it's basically meaning an instrumental showpiece. So let's go listen to this toccata. And this is the toccata, or the beginning of the opera Orfeo. So, looking at Monteverdi's Orfeo, we'll look at the prologue, Del mio prenaso amato. Now, the plot of Orfeo is based on a Greek myth. It's based on the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. And this example is a monody sung by La Musica, and it's a 5-strophe monody. Basically, that means that you're going to see the melody come back 5 times, and each time the melody may be altered depending on the text. Okay, so we'll have a ritornello, which occurs before and after each of these strophes, or each and after these melodies. Okay. And this ritornello is important in opera, because the idea it comes back and it comes back and it comes back, or it returns. The piece itself, the singer talks about, and I'm going to read it real quickly, is, where I vary my songs, now happy, now sad, no small bird shall move among these bushes, nor on these banks surrounding a wave be heard, and every breeze shall stay its journey. Let's go listen. Continuing, we have recitative and arias. Now, opera didn't automatically start out with these recitatives and arias. It evolves over time. Okay, so we start off with these monodies, these solo songs, and eventually we have these monodies kind of split into two singing styles, or two camps. And we have the recitatives, And the recitative is a speech-like melody, kind of a narrow range, and they function to communicate the plot to the audience. Okay. If the character on stage is going to be going to go give the lady on stage a kiss, he's going to talk about what he's going to do, and he's going to communicate that through the recitative. If he's going to go kill somebody on stage, he's going to tell you how he's going to do it through this recitative. Okay. Now, the opposite is going to be the arias. Arias are reserved, this says for the expression of feelings, okay? They're very, very song-like. They're legato, they're the melodies, very, very wide vocal range, and they definitely are going to have a full accompaniment with the orchestra and the basso continuo. The arias are about singing about your expression. If I'm going to murder somebody, I'm going to sing about my rage and how it makes me feel. Or if I'm in love with somebody, so before I go for this embrace, I'm going to stop and sing my aria about how much I love them. Okay, so again, that's the two differences between these two things. Recitatives are about communicating the plot with a speech-like melody. And it's very, very limited music underneath, okay, so the audience can understand. Arias are, again, about expressing this emotion and this feeling about what I'm going to do, and you're going to have the orchestral accompaniment backing it up. Let's listen to the recitative first. So we heard something sparse in the bass with the basso continuo, and we heard the singer singing above it, kind of with the speech-like melody. Next, let's listen to the aria, and the aria is going to be much more fuller. Henry Purcell. Now, Henry Purcell, he was an English composer, son of one of the king's singers. He was an organist at Westminster Abbey in London, England. And if you guys aren't familiar, Westminster Abbey, it's one of the abbeys owned by the royals, and to be an organist there is a pretty big deal. Okay. Because you're spending a lot of time working for the crown, and he was a very, very important composer in England. Okay. He definitely spends a lot of his time, he devoted much of his time composing for the theater as well. And we're going to look at one of his operas, Dido and Aeneas. Henry Purcell's Dido and Aeneas. It was one of the first operas written in English. It was written in 1689. The libretto, remember, that's the text, is based on Virgil's epic, the Aeneid. Okay, and basically the story is the storyline is basically Dido, who's the queen of Carthage, gets deserted by her lover Aeneas, who's a Trojan hero, and dying of a broken heart, she expresses her despair to her servant Belinda. And if you look at the picture, you can see her lying down, Dido, the queen of Carthage, and then Belinda standing up. Okay. Now, we're going to look at a scene from Dido and Aeneas. We're going to look at the recitative and aria from it. And the recitative is about, it's called Thy Hand Belinda, where where Dido's explaining to her handservant, Belinda, her grief and sorrow. Okay. And it begins with this recitative. It's basically a chromatic descending vocal line, and it's accompanied by a basso continuo, but it's very, very sparse, so we can understand the text. Let's listen. the recitative will set up this aria. Now, the aria is based on this basso continuo, or they call it ground bass. And what is that? Well, it's basically a repeated bass line over and over and over again. And the aria is built on top of this bass line. Okay. Now, the bass line is basically, it sounds like this chromatic descending line. And in chromaticism in the Baroque era, often symbolize grief, okay, or sorrow. The text of the aria is basically, when I'm laid in earth, may my wrongs create no trouble on thy breast. Remember me, but forget my fates. Let's listen to this chromatic descending line, and this is the basso continuo. This is the basso ostinato for the aria. Now, what I want you folks to do now is let's go back and let's listen to the entire recitative and aria all the way through. So this concludes chapter 6. Make sure we go back and do the listening, and thank you very much for following along.